Mexican Standard is always made before the appearance of the Player series, before the series is renamed. It was made of basically from slats, from really thin pieces. And I take this guitar out of the case, and he says, it's a fake, and back into the case. I have an American Standard, but this one is different. Why is counters are more angular? Well, when I came across them, all the guitars were just amazing for that money. And he replies, Vasil, they write everywhere, everything is okay, the Japanese guitars are cool, we'll buy more, let's sell. That is, don't buy guitar from musicians. Hello friends, Dr. Niter with you again, and today we will have a very interesting topic. It's gonna cover not Gibson guitars and Les Pauls, but Fender guitars, namely the Stratocaster. In this series of videos you can find out a lot of interesting information about the Stratocaster, which my good friend, collector and researchers of the history of Fender guitars, Vasil Sidarok, will tell us about. Subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell, so as not to miss the next episodes. We will talk about the Stratocaster. After all, the musician does not live by Les Paul alone. Let's go! Hey! Hi, Aleš. I'm very glad to see you here. Same here. Tell me, please, how did your love for the Stratocaster begin? Well, it was love at first sight, through the picture. At that time, I was fond of Nirvana, and I saw a calendar with Kurt Cobain, where he was with his black Strat, with a black pickguard, on which there was the inscription, "Vandalism is beautiful as a stone in the face of a cop." And I saw this guitar, and I just fell in love with it. Its silhouette, all of it. It was just amazing. And I thought, I want this kind of guitar. I did not know at all what it was called. At the time, I thought it was a Fender Mustang, because in all the literature it was written that Kurt loved the Fender Mustang. And I thought it was a Fender Mustang, and I want myself a Fender Mustang. But later I realized that it was a Stratocaster. That's how it probably was. What was your first Fender Strat? The first Stratocaster that can be called a Stratocaster must have been the Squire. I had Squire Affinity, black, naturally. Yeah. And so that's how it began. I was already looking forward to buying Strato-like guitars, because visually I really liked them. The most interesting purchase was buying the first Fender in my whole life. It was the beginning of the 2000s. And then I was going to buy myself my first Strat, a real Fender, and began to look through the newspapers, which we had at the time. And I ran into the advertisement for the sale of an American Stratocaster for $400. At that time, it was good money. Still, for the American Stratocaster, the price was quite low. Well, of course, I fell for this ad, yeah. But since I was absolutely clueless in this, I asked the seller to whom I came for help, but he was as clueless as I was. It has made in America label, everything is okay. I asked to take a guitar for a test, with a money-back guarantee. I had a good lad at the time. His name was Sasha Nisonov. He already had Fender guitars, and he was good at them, as it seemed to me at the time. In any case, he understood more than me. I didn't understand anything, and I remember how we met with him, and I take this guitar out of the case, and he says, it's a fake, and back into the case, and I say, wait, Sasha, but it's so ashy, so beautiful, with a black pickguard, like CBS, made in the 70s, although I try to remember it. I can imagine its silhouette in my head. I understand that was a fake 100%, yeah. And I'm like, how so? What the hell? Why? Yeah, he says, it is, he says, local craftsman job. There's this guy, Pyotr Ushakov. He was the one who made this guitar. I'm like, yeah, damn it. I got upset and took back this guitar. Did it sound at least, or did you even try? I didn't turn it on. It was just this kind of purchase. I just took it to show Sasha. He had his own studio. And this was supposed to be the second stage, to listen to the instrument, but it didn't come to it, because he immediately said it was a fake, and you have to take it back. So I returned it, and it was probably the first bell in my head that it would be actually nice to understand this stuff, because you can get screwed if you don't have good friends. Of course, in the modern world it's easier than at the time where there was no more internet. You don't know anything, you don't get any information at all. Yeah. And then he helped me. He said, "Vasa, calm down, everything is fine, I will help you. Let us buy you a Mexican first." And he brought me my first standard Mexican, a new one. I remember choosing it in the catalog. He showed me a Fender catalog, he had one. "What kind of guitar do you want?" And it was so beautiful, it had such a satin. What was that color? MFA night blue. Mid blue with black pickguard. Well, I was still obsessed with Cobain anyway at the time. So, and in general, he brought me this Mexican guitar. And at that time it cost $475 new, which it was pretty good. And the first thing, of course, that started to happen with the guitar, naturally I cherished it. It was a lot of money for me. I was 18 and at the time it was wow. And then, damn it, this matte garbage began to polish with spots. What to do? And I thought I should sell it and buy some ordinary Sunburst Strat, the same Mexican one. And I sold it safely and bought the next one. The standard one, usual, but already in a classic form, in Sunburst with a 3-layer pickguard. And then probably the story was with the purchase of American guitars. Naturally, I did not stop there. And after that, I also had a Fender Classic Mexican, Classic 50s. Now this series is called Winter. At the time, it was called the Classic. It was much cooler because it was still made of different wood, without veneer, like an ordinary Mexicans, because they're made of slats and veneered on both sides. Prior to the appearance and renaming all of these models, before the appearance of the Player series, all the Maxes were veneered. So the Classic was already made of normal alder from 3 pieces, Sunburst and like a sensor was there. It was already much nicer. But naturally, I gravitated towards the American guitar. And then this thing happens. We have a guy, Nikita Granovsky, who began to bring instruments from eBay. And then I ordered my first American standard from him. Yeah. It was with maple neck, alder, and colored in candy apple red. In my memory, the guitar was not that bad. After the Maxes, it was something. Could you feel the difference? The difference was felt. To me, in fact, I just now understand that actually I got a good standard from a good era. At some point, you started importing guitars yourself. How many guitars have passed through you? Oh, honestly, I did not count them, but I think about 500 probably passed for sure. You now have a remote selection of guitars. You bought them online, right? And you have some criteria by which you can choose a guitar that is more or less suitable remotely. Yeah, it was also a trial and error method. Naturally, I ran into some difficulties with making choices. Some guitars came in terrible shape. And this is where I got really involved, as a serious hobby, as it were, with learning terminology, the periods of production of the instruments. Why are some of them playing and others not? And the most striking example, as far as I remember, when I bought my first American Standard, and I also bought another American Standard, but older. It was heavier, like a tank. It was, in general, it did not play at all, and it seemed strange to me. At least it would seem so. An older instrument, it must play somehow. I've read a lot of different information, especially Russian language forums, where there's a lot of subjective information. They said that the older the instrument is, the cooler it is. Vintage. Certainly not vintage 1990s, but nevertheless, the instrument should have already played out during this time and play well. But it played really worse, and I could hear that easily, and I did not understand what was the matter. And then my study of the topic began. Why and when the instruments are better? Why isn't it playing? And I immediately noticed, and what struck me was the counters of the body. They were different, and I'm like, stop. I have an American standard, but this one is different. Why is counters are more angular? It's strange, because in all Russian language literature, I remember there was a magazine for guitars in Russia, and of course I read it. It covered topics like the history of Fender Stratocaster, and it was written, for example, when it was presented, in what form it was, and that it did not change much over the years. And this is the biggest snag, because it was not at all noted there, but it was colossally different. I got it when a lot of guitars went through me. There are many standards from different decades, and they're very, very different. And there are very cool periods where they were made, where there were a lot of them, where there was a more stable quality and stable guitarist than other times. But we'll talk about this in more detail later. Because the American standard is in principle a people's instrument that they often choose as the first American guitar. And these are actually great instruments, but they are not so simple. Well, tell me how to choose a good guitar on eBay or on Reverb, and how not to go tits up. Well, probably the most important criteria that is important to me when buying an instrument is who the seller is. That is, don't buy a guitar from musicians. A good guitar is unlikely to be sold to you by a musician. Yeah, makes sense. The buyers, they usually ask questions. Why a person? For what reason? He sells an instrument. That is, most often guitars, for example, made in America, are bought by regular people, ordinary clerks from offices, just to play at home. They don't know much about the business. More often than not, for some reason, such people have better items than the musicians. Because musicians won't sell you a good guitar. It's almost impossible. Because a person sells it for a reason. Try to buy the instrument in its original form. If the sensors were changed in it, something happened there. Most often this means that the person was not satisfied with something, and he began to change it somehow. And as a result, he stopped his experiments because he did not achieve the result, and sells the instrument. This is the common thing. Of course, there are some exceptions, that is, you can buy a guitar, a good one, from a musician because he needs to send his son to college or something else, or he urgently needs money. That's when, in such cases, you come across a good instrument. But I would not take risks with such cases. It's better to buy instruments from regular people who bought a guitar to indulge in. I came across a good instrument following this logic quite often. Good. What is the difference then between the Japanese Fender from the American or Mexican one? Because there are a lot of Japanese Fenders, and they say they sound good too. What's the difference? I would certainly recommend buying American guitars. Fender appeared in '82 in Japan. Why? Because the quality of the American guitars was poor. At that time, in the 70s, especially in the late 70s, it got really bad. But this is in terms of making instruments. We're not talking about the sound, because most of the time people are mistaking and they say that, oh, CBS made disgusting guitars. But it's not so. That is, we're not talking about the sound, but we say about how they are made. And the thing is that naturally Japanese stepped on their toes and made clones of the guitars. And it was necessary to somehow resolve this issue, and they came to Japan and talked there with some companies who wanted to invest in it. That is, in fact, they sold the rights to make the instruments for the domestic market. And they had everything ready. That is, they chose the Fujigen factory at that time, and they released the first Japanese Fender guitars. Naturally, when Dan Smith, one of the key people of the company, received the first Japanese guitars, he just sobbed there, because they were just amazingly done. And the American ones were very, very bad. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? Well, most likely because of the bureaucracy. We'll talk about it a little later when we touch on the history of the American Standard, who played an important role in this, in the deterioration of the quality of Fender instruments. Why did it start to grow and why did it fall? Now we talk about Japanese guitars. And about them, I could say that they are all very well done. So far, they have been flawlessly made. But more often than not, they don't sound like American guitars. But you brought a lot of Japanese guitars. What experience have you had with them? Naturally, I read a lot on the forums about how amazing Japanese guitars are, and this information, which even now I present to you, suggests that the Japanese guitars are superb. In fact, this is not completely true. That's speaking from my experience. A friend of mine began to bring tools from InJapan, injapan.ru, an intermediary for the purchase of instruments from Japan, from Yapu. So he invited me to do these things with them. So it works like this: he buys and I sell. And so we brought the first Stratocaster with sensors Texas Special 86. The guitar came just like it was made yesterday. It was just perfect. It lay all these years somewhere. And I was stunned. I already had custom shop guitars at that time. And wow, what they say is true about Japanese guitars. I liked it just as much. That is, the guitar was really amazing, very responsive. It sounded just great. Well, damn it, I said, Kostya, let's not sell this guitar. I'll take it for myself. And he replies, Vasil, they write everywhere. Everything is okay. The Japanese guitars are cool. We'll buy more. Let's sell. We bought it for 600 and sold it for 800. And I have never seen such guitars again. All these songs about the wanted GVs, these are the first instruments released in Japan with the GV prefix, which were replicas of certain years. I brought this as well. I didn't come across any more Japanese well-playing guitars, according to my criteria. Again, I will say that this is all very subjective. The sound is. Sound is very, very subjective. I choose what suits me best. Therefore, you should not directly trust my words here. Each person has his or her own criteria, and it very much depends on the experience and the number of instruments that you have laid your hands on in your entire life. But what is important to you about the sound of a Stratocaster? What are you looking for in it when you choose it and when you play? The fact is that a lot of people make mistakes in choosing guitars. For example, they play only by themselves. That is, many people play at home with their amplifiers, And maybe everything is pretty fine, but the most important criteria is for the instrument to sound on stage, for the guitar to play in a group and be in its right place. This is where the problems most often begin. This is the coolest crash test ever. How does the instrument sound in your team? That is, a lot of guitars just fall apart in the mix for many different reasons. Because there is a misconception, as many people like, for example, overly light instruments that have a lot of air in them. They turn it on at home, for example, in an amplifier by yourself. For example, heavy guitars sound a little narrower, and the light ones sound so voluminous, beautiful, and you think, wow, this is the sound I want. And more often than not, this is cheating, because guitars that have too much air, they create problems when you play in a band. Because the guitar starts to climb into the bass register. For example, they conflict with the bass, or with the bass drum, and it spreads over the mix and your guitar is not heard. Yeah. There's the other type of a guitar, which is very sharp. People love vintage guitars, the sound of which is crunchy. What happens most often with these guitars? They're overly thin, and in the mix they sound thin, and there is no core, foundation in the sound. And you start making the guitar louder because you can't hear it, and the poison begins to pour in. That is, the excessive dominance of high frequencies. So you need to look for some kind of middle ground. It's clear that for some time that I have seen them, I can already minimize the misses when I listen to the guitar myself in a regular amplifier. But a person who has no experience may not hear it. But I can be wrong too. This does not mean that I'm a wise guru and I will choose a guitar for you just by playing it once myself. Naturally, you need to live with the guitar in order to understand it. And that's why it all happened. I tested all the instruments on the stage. And I began to notice some moments. What is happening, why it's happening, analyze some of the issues that were in these guitars. Why isn't playing? That is, this curiosity, my curiosity in these matters, it led me to some conclusions. And Japanese guitars, I brought a lot of them. But one played. Yeah. This ended the Japanese guitars for me. Are things better with American ones? If you choose the right American guitar, things are better. The trick is, what you can do is to minimize misses, but guessing 100% is unrealistic until you hold the instrument in your hand. Until you live with it, you will not test it completely. This does not mean that you will hit the mark, but it is very important, of course, that I would like to advise other people. Guys, don't gamble. Do not buy an overpriced instrument. That is, you look at the pictures, there are also very cool tricks when a person photographs a guitar, very beautiful, so you want to buy it right away. You like its color, you look at it and say, here it is. But most often this is done on purpose, so you buy into it. And people overpay money for it. And the thing is that a guitar comes in and you don't like it. So what you're gonna do? You'll be losing money. Therefore, I have worked out for myself a formula for buying instruments. I actually bought many for myself. I'm carrying the instrument myself and for myself. And it was important for me. So it needs to be bought for a slightly lower price, so that it does not exceed some of my norms there. Not my personal norm, but the market one. There is a market, and there is a demand on the market. So it's better to buy it at a slightly discounted price. Because if an instrument comes to you and it does not play as you would like, you can always sell it and compensate your waiting time for this instrument, and sell it there a little more expensive and make money on it. That is, when the guitar comes, you don't have to be upset that you don't like it. You can sell it. Others might like it better. I say that the sound is subjective, yeah. The Russians have a saying, what is good for a Russian is death for a German, yeah? It's all the same here. Everything in sound is very individual. Because what is the perfect standard of sound? It simply does not exist, this perfect standard. It's always contextual, yes. It all depends on what you are looking for. There is a favorite performer and you like the way his guitar sounds. We look at the stars, for example, the Stratocaster, and they all sound different. Their strats all sound differently, completely. There is nothing in common between them. Well, maybe some similarity. Of course, I exaggerate. But let's take the Clapton Strat and the Gilmour Strat. The Gilmour sound and the Clapton sound, well, of course, musician sounds, not an instrument. Yeah, naturally. And people forget that the amplifier you use and the equipment are an important element in the circuit. Because, for example, an amplifier affects the sound more than a guitar. Any good amp will power your not-so-good guitar, rather than the other way around. It can even uncover your mistakes. Yeah, it will teach you how to play. This also will happen. Therefore, I recommend buying instruments without fervor and excitement. Okay, what can you tell us about Mexican guitars? Well, first of all, initially Fender opened a factory in Mexico to make accessories. And then they smoothly moved on to the guitars. The Mexico factory is actually a 6-hour drive from the main factory in Corona, so it's very convenient for them. And so, to get away from American tax laws, basically to pay less. And naturally, with cheaper labor, they do practically the same thing as the Japanese. The trouble with Mexican guitars is that they are as cheap as possible. That is especially their fascination with polyester, because they are, well, really flooded with varnish. It's terrible. And the guitar barely resonates. A lot of guitars are just like a stone. But this also happens due to the fact that, for example, Mexican Standard is always made before the appearance of the Player series, before the series is renamed. It was made of basically from slats, from really, really thin pieces. There are 5-6 pieces which were sanded top and bottom with Adler veneer in order to hide the number of these slats. This is easily seen on sunburst guitars, which, for example, the cutout for the belly is completely painted over in black. The thing is that naturally such guitars probably are unable to play in principle. Plus, the ceramic pickups are also a solution from the point of view when they make such guitars. Then it was a normal decision to put ceramics, because they are more powerful and at least give something out. Because if you install Anlica there, the guitar won't play at all. There are many who do it, and I don't understand why. A design feature, that is a design feature, it's just to make it as cheap as possible, and it goes in contradiction with the concept of sound. No one thought about it. It's basically furniture. Yeah, it's a mass product. For poor people who want a Fender inscription on their heads. In terms of quality, they're very well done. Outwardly, everything looks great. Because, well, after all, everything is done on a CNC, everything is neat, everything is clear. Plus, the workers on the factory, they do their job very well. You can see that. But this is not about the sound. It's a cheap guitar, and that's it. That is, they have a more serious series. For example, they have the Deluxe series. Now it is called Player Plus, which is better done. That is, we will not find veneer there. You can find ash. Well, of course, this is also the quality of this material is not, since they have it all very narrow. Then most likely they just supply wood to them naturally, not of the best quality. most often ash guitars are heavy. Again, the varnish. It's all about the varnish. Polyester varnish and a lot of it. That is, it simply does not let the guitar play. Yeah, with a layer of 3mm, it's just immense. Yeah, although I say that, I know that you're preaching the religion of nitrocellulose varnish. I really respect your opinion, but I'm not really of this religion. I think that it is not the varnish that matters, but its thickness. I agree with you, absolutely. Yeah, it's better, let it be polyurethane varnish, but it will be a minimal layer than many guitars are now, even those covered with nitrocellulose, the same Fender of more expensive series or custom shop, which are simply filled with a thick layer. Well, about modern nitrocellulose, you can see it here in this video. Well, that's why, of course, a thin layer of polyurethane is better than a thin layer of nitrocellulose. Therefore, yeah, everything depends on the thickness of the varnish. All Mexican guitars are heavily covered. They have, for example, a road-worn series that are also relict. This project was made under the auspices of an American custom shop. They have arrived on site and taught people how to do it. Well, of course, all the abrasions are more standardized there, but they're covered with nitrocellulose, and still there is a thinner layer because the relic is made. They, of course, play better. These MIMs are not bad. Nice guitars can come across. I've seen some of them. I've had some that did not leave negative impressions. But again, we run into the fact that for this money you can buy an American guitar, and not everyone will go to buy MIM, which is, in principle, is a pretty bad asset. There are all sorts of situations in life. Sometimes we have to sell it for one reason or another that does not even depend on our desire to change the guitar. Paying rent, children, tuition fees, something else, and you need to sell the instrument. And what will you do if you bought overpriced or illiquid guitars? For example, that's something I don't quite understand. There are G and L guitars. The guitars are great. Well, when I came across them, all the guitars were just amazing for that money. But no one buys them. No one just does. And when we talk about the sound, yes, of course, we look at what G&L is worth, like an American Standard. You can find it for this kind of money. But it is much better than the Standard. But they are not sellable. That is, they can even hang for months in the shop, even years, not to be sold. In any case, in our market, I mean in the Belarusian one, well, what I have noticed is that these guitars sell badly, although the guitars are beautiful, and I don't understand this. And what will you do then? If you need money urgently, what will you do? Nothing. You will not sell this guitar. Well, everybody wants a Fender or Gibson. Yeah, well, it's just the Fender Strat is the most, I call it a bargaining chip. The easiest guitar to sell. It is Strat. That is, the Les Paul would be the second, and Telecaster may be the third. And then SG and all the rest. But these are the most popular guitars, and everyone wants them. And of course, when selling a Strat, especially if you have an American one, you will always sell it. No matter how bad it is, it will still be bought. We do not think that this applies only to those who sell guitars. This also applies to ordinary musicians who buy instruments for themselves, or they want an upgrade. It needs to be sold when you want something better. Listen, what do you say about the custom shop? Custom shop? Everything is also ambiguous. Because, again, we return to our formula. The price and what we get for it. So I think that the price for the custom shop is over the top. Because when you give a certain amount of money for a custom shop and it doesn't impress you, You think, how can this be? I gave so much money for this guitar. What's wrong with it? And there are plenty of such guitars, because I've mostly sold custom shops in my life, due to the fact that they did not suit me. There were, of course, guitars that suited me. Among the custom shops, there are guitars that are just normal guitars. There's no wow effect happening. And for the wow effect to take place in custom shop, you have to look very hard for that kind of guitar. And the price for them. The thing is, do not forget that the price means that you can always sell this guitar for that money. That's all, no problems for you. That is why I'm talking about this formula for buying a guitar for the third time already. I say no excitement. Buy at normal price, at mid-market price, and everything is going to be okay. Because anyway, until you get along with the guitar, until you try it, you would feel it for a certain amount of time, you will not understand it. Does it suit you or not? The Americans have a cool thing with a bunny bag for a month. You can go to the store to buy a guitar and return it within a month without giving any reasons. Yeah, one friend of mine came to one such store and bought 10 ES335 and then returned 9 and left only 1. Well, of course, nobody will like it. I work myself in trade. I have been working in music stores for 16 years now. And I know how sellers react to such characters. Yeah, it hurts. But of course I understand the buyer. I understand the buyer and why he does it. And therefore, for me, it has always been an important rule that the client is satisfied, because it's very important. I don't like this kind of aggressive trading. So you just sell it. Tell you, listen, take, and buy right away. This has never happened to me. That's when I sell a guitar, if a person wants to listen on his own, on his gear, in his room, to take it to a rehearsal somewhere else, then please. Well, I think it was very interesting. Ask your question in the comment section. If you did not find the answer in this video, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Like it, go to my Patreon, there is a lot of interesting information there. And now I say goodbye to you, but not for long.
Rock and roll for all.